Hello and welcome to My PGCE, a podcast documenting my journey as a trainee teacher, with a special focus on mental health. I am your host, James B. Quitting my job as a bookshelver at the library in order to train to become a secondary maths teacher feels like stepping out of order and comfort into chaos and the unknown, which can be a great source of anxiety. But like I said in the first episode, I feel that the sense of purpose I'll get from teaching will be strong enough to dispel most mental health problems. In the meantime, however, there are certain things I can do to help mitigate this anticipatory anxiety. And one of those things is to prepare. Doing the PGCE will be like journeying into a new and alien land, so I would do well to find out as much as I can about that land before setting off, hence the preparation. The preparation I've done so far can be separated into three categories: admin, academic, and practical. And I'll go through each in turn. Admin, though boring, is important, so I still think it's worth mentioning, albeit briefly, and I'll get it out of the way first. So when I say admin, I guess what I mean is filling in forms. And these forms should be sent to you by your university. They may include things like responding to your offer if you haven't already done so, health assessment forms, capacity to teach forms, suitability declaration forms, which are all rather dull and can be filled in pretty quickly. But the big one is the DBS check. Now, a DBS, or Disclosure and Barring Service check, is a record of an individual's convictions, cautions, reprimands and warnings, and can also include intelligence held by the UK police that relates to that individual and their suitability for a position working with children and or vulnerable adults. A position like being a teacher. To support your DBS application, you will need to provide at least 3 original items of identification. I think I used my passport, driving licence and birth certificate. And you have to present these documents in person, which under ordinary circumstances, you would usually do at your interview, but if your interview has been conducted remotely during a pandemic, for example, you may have to make a special journey to your university. Once you've sent off your DBS application, you should usually receive your certificate within a couple of weeks, but it can take longer, so it's important to get cracking with this as soon as you can, because you don't want it to delay the start of your school placement. And with that, I think we can draw a line under admin. Next up, academic prep. I should start by saying that what follows isn't what I think everyone should do before they start their PGCE. It's just what I've done, okay? My university very helpfully offers a pre-course preparation webpage with some useful resources on it. I think the first thing I looked at was the Little Academic Writing Booklet by Val Brooks, which is there to help you prepare to meet the academic writing requirements of a master's qualification. So the PGCE is assessed at master's level, hence the postgraduate in Postgraduate Certificate of Education. Now, I've already done a master's. In fact, I kind of did a double master's, so an MPhil is a 2-year research course. But it was a couple of years ago now, and I thought it would be good to refresh my memory. The booklet goes through the importance of strategy, stages in the assessment writing process, which are selecting a topic or title, recognising the demands of a question, preparatory reading and research, developing an assignment plan, drafting and revising the assignment, and finally editing and proofreading the final draft. And it also goes through writing conventions, all of which was very helpful. so I'd recommend that. By the way, if you don't have access to any of the resources I mentioned, then don't hesitate to get in touch and I can send you a copy. Next, I had a look at the suggested pre-course reading list, the length of which surprised me. It was 11 pages long. So I quickly came to peace with the fact that I wasn't going to be able to read all of this. But what I did instead was go through each item on the list and summarised in a couple of lines what I thought was the main message of the article or book or webpage or whatever it was. So now, even though I've read no one book from cover to cover, I feel like I've got a good overview of the sorts of things that are being discussed in the literature. Going back to our PGCE alien land analogy, even though I don't know too much about any particular region, I've got a rough idea of the lay of the land, which will hopefully mean I won't get too lost, at least on the academic, theoretical side of things. My university also recommended that I do the Preparing for a PGCE MOOC, which is a massive open online course on FutureLearn, which I did. It was a 4-week course that required around 3 hours of study per week, and we covered topics such as the legal framework around teaching, safeguarding, mental health and well-being for teachers, motivations, and reflective practice. Now, what I just said I pretty much just read to you off the course webpage, which doesn't really illuminate my personal experience. So to do that, I'm going to read to you some of the notes I made during the course. Now, these were things that I found particularly interesting or perhaps controversial, and they're also the sorts of things that I thought I might one day discuss in an episode of the podcast. First, pedagogical content knowledge and the curse of knowledge. So during the course, we learnt about pedagogical content knowledge, which is basically knowing how to teach your subject. And that reminded me of something I once read about called the curse of knowledge, which is essentially the inability to imagine someone else not knowing what you know. A teacher, for example, not being able to imagine a student not knowing what they, the teacher, knows. And so I think that pedagogical content knowledge can be helpfully understood as a way to overcome the curse of knowledge. Because you can't really teach your subject unless you can put yourself in your student's shoes and imagine what it's like to not know what you're talking about. Second, metacognition. So cognition is kind of just thinking. And metacognition, in the simplest and most general terms, is just thinking about thinking, surveying your own thoughts, or other mental states like emotions or feelings or desires. So you could see how metacognition is very important for mental health and well-being, but it also seems to be essential for learning. So an effective learner seems to be a student who can reflect on their learning and think about the way they're learning things, or not, as the case may be. Third, is teacher mental health inherently valuable, or valuable only as a means to achieving learning outcomes? Fourth, I saw written down in several places that every child is unique and that children learn and develop at different rates. And I thought that this must be a great source of stress for teachers. I'd have thought it must also be important to remember, when it comes to lesson planning, that most children learn in similar ways and develop at similar rates. Fifth, bad behaviour was often only spoken about in very abstract terms. I think I'd have appreciated a few more concrete examples. So, the sorts of bad behaviour that you're most likely to encounter on a regular basis in the classroom. I think that would have been very helpful. Sixth, maths anxiety. So, what is it about maths that seems to instill such fear and trepidation in so many students? Now, I have my own theory, or at least a partial theory. I think it might have something to do with the cumulative nature of learning maths. So each maths lesson builds on the last, and if you missed something, then everything thereafter starts to make less and less sense. And once you've fallen behind, it's quite difficult to catch up. So you end up sitting in maths lessons, not having a clue what's going on, and it becomes a very unpleasant experience. So if my theory has any merit, it would be interesting to think about different ways in which maths anxiety could be addressed. Seventh, the lesson as a hero's journey. So, lessons should have a narrative, and any narrative has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And these roughly correspond with conflict, struggle, and resolution. But there are countless different ways in which these three acts can play out, and countless more if you take into account plot twists. So the question naturally arises, which type of narrative should the lesson be? And I really like the hero's journey, where a hero goes on an adventure, is victorious in a decisive crisis, and comes home changed or transformed. So think of Harry Potter, or better, Lord of the Rings. When thinking about a lesson as a hero's journey, the student would be the hero. They would journey into the unknown and be confronted by something they don't understand, and then return home with new knowledge. But in this story, what part does the teacher play? Are they Dumbledore or Gandalf? Or Ron Weasley or Samwise Gamgee? Or are they Voldemort or Sauron? Very interesting indeed. Eighth, the duty to actively promote the fundamental British values of democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs. But should British values be promoted? None of them are without their problems, and they are perhaps even inconsistent. So, what if you had a student who believed that democracy wasn't the best way to run a country, and who also prioritised community over individual liberty? And this isn't a purely hypothetical student, so you wouldn't have to look very far beyond the West to find students who believed such things. So suppose you've got such a student in your class. Maybe they and their family have emigrated or are perhaps even refugees. Would you, as a teacher, be able to promote the fundamental British values of democracy and individual liberty, and at the same time promote tolerance for that student's contradictory beliefs? Or would you just end up alienating them? I don't know. Ninth, what children think about is what they learn. Simple and obvious though this may seem, I think it was one of the most interesting things I learnt on the FutureLearn course. It highlights just how difficult the task of the teacher really is. So if children learn only what they think about, then in order to teach them something, you have to get them to think about it. So teachers, in effect, have to be experts in mind control. And they're not only trying to control one child's mind, but a whole classroom full. And I doubt that any two minds are controlled in exactly the same way. So yes, it's amazing. 10th, how should we measure equality? By opportunity or by outcome? And what, if any, is the relationship between the two? And finally, 11th, a lot of attention seems to be given to the question of how students learn best, and rightly so. But what about the question of how teachers learn how to teach best? Do teachers learn how to teach in the same way as students learn? Again, I don't know. But it would be very interesting to find out. So those were some of the thoughts that were inspired by the Preparing for a PGCE course on FutureLearn, which I would highly recommend. And like I said, I hope to explore and develop some of these ideas in future episodes of the podcast. So stick around for those. I'd say the last bit of academic preparation I've done ahead of the PGCE, and I'm still doing, is reading Craig Barton's How I Wish I'd Taught Maths, which I am really enjoying, and again, would recommend. And not only to aspiring maths teachers. So there's a lot of stuff in there that's maths specific, but there's just as much stuff that would apply to teaching in general. Just so you can get an idea, here are the chapter headings: how students think and learn, motivation, explicit instruction, focusing thinking, self-explanations, making the most of worked examples, choice of examples and practice questions, deliberate practice, problem solving and independence, purposeful practice, formative assessment and diagnostic questions, and finally, long-term memory and desirable difficulties. Now, I don't know what all those are about yet. I'm only about a third of the way through, but it's been great so far. And that's about the extent of my academic preparation. On now to the practical preparation. I'm going to talk about money, clothes, sleep, food, and exercise. But first, my guiding principle here is that I'm expecting the PGCE to be tough. So I want everything else to be as easy as possible, to involve as little thought as possible, so that I can devote the bulk of my brain to the PGCE. With that in mind, let's talk about money. During my PGCE, my income will be the Mathematics Teacher Training Scholarship and a student loan, both of which get paid in instalments throughout the year. So I've recorded in a spreadsheet when each instalment is going to be paid. Next, I worked out an estimate for my monthly costs. Things like food, utilities, gym membership. Thankfully, given my job as a resident tutor, I don't have to worry about rent. The big unknown when it comes to costs is fuel, because I don't yet know where my school placement will be. So for the purposes of working out my monthly costs, I've just overestimated what I'm likely to spend on fuel. So once I knew both my income and my estimated costs, I created a cash flow forecast. I guess that's what you'd call it. And I've now got a good idea of what my financial situation will look like throughout my PGCE, which is one less thing to worry about. Speaking about worrying, I'd say that the single biggest source of anxiety for me in preparation for my PGCE has been, funnily enough, what I'm going to wear. I find clothes shopping stressful at the best of times, but the thought of clothes shopping for smart clothes was almost unbearable. I haven't worn a tie since school, which was over a decade ago, and I absolutely hated it. I felt like I was being choked all day long. I also didn't enjoy school very much in general, so it also has that negative association for me. Since then, I've mostly stuck to trainers, jeans, and oversized t-shirts and jumpers. But I doubt that's appropriate attire for a trainee teacher. So I knew I had to bite the bullet and go shopping. But so that I wasn't going in blind, I decided to do some research beforehand, and I discovered the idea of a capsule wardrobe, which is a limited selection of interchangeable clothes that complement each other. For formal menswear, for example, 2 pairs of trousers, 1 charcoal, 1 navy blue, 2 shirts, 1 white, 1 light blue, a brown belt and brown shoes, and a variety of different coloured ties. So that's exactly what I got, and I got almost everything from Marks and Spencer's. I went with M&S because it seemed to be good quality and yet also good value for money compared with some of the other brand names. I also wanted to remove the paradox of choice because there's so many options out there when it comes to formal menswear, and it can be quite overwhelming, especially for someone like me who loathes shopping. But once I'd decided that I was going to go for M&S, then that narrowed down the field and made things much easier. Oh, and I also went for shirts that were non-iron, so that should hopefully save some time. And now that I have my capsule wardrobe, I take some comfort in the knowledge that I could pull out any trouser, shirt, tie combo and it will at least look passable. So that's a little less to worry about in the mornings when I'm getting ready. The next 3, sleep, food, and exercise, are very important because my mental health largely depends on them. Now, people often talk about looking after their physical health and their mental health like they're separate things. But the dichotomy is a false one. In truth, our mental health largely depends on our physical health. And the converse is also true. Our physical health largely depends on our mental health. To see the power that the mind has over the body, just think of the placebo effect. In fact, I heard about a study recently where participants were not only given a placebo, but they were also told that they were being given a placebo. And yet their health still improved, which is mind-boggling. So yes, the mind and the body can't be separated in any meaningful way. And when I find that my mental health is starting to suffer, it's usually because I've let at least one of 3 things slip. I'm not getting good quality sleep, my diet's rubbish, or I'm not exercising. So in preparation for my PGCE, when I'll need my mental health to be tip-top, I've done as much as I can to secure each one in place. I'll start with sleep. So, as you know, I'm a resident tutor, which means I live with students in halls of residence as part of the university's welfare system. Now, we do our best to surround ourselves with the quieter students, or at least the students who, on their accommodation application forms, have indicated that they would like to live in quieter halls. But even so, a good night's sleep is rarely guaranteed. My building is quite old and doors tend to slam. So I reported those doors over the summer as faults, and they've since been fixed so that they don't slam quite as loudly, which is great. And I also invested in a really good custom pair of earplugs. And once my school placement has started, I plan to get into a routine where I'm going to bed early and getting up early. I'll aim to get at least 7, but hopefully 8 hours sleep a night. What about food? I plan to do most of my meal prep at the weekend. I'll make a big batch of something like dal or curry or stew. Portion it out into takeaway tubs, which I've been saving up over the summer, and then freeze it for the week ahead. Then each evening I'll defrost a portion and have it with pasta or rice or potatoes, I don't know. Also at the weekend, I'll make a big batch of egg mayo, and that'll be what I have in my sandwiches for lunch throughout the week. And I plan to make those sandwiches the night before. I generally try to limit the amount of things I have to do in the morning. I like to get up, eat breakfast, shower, and go. Speaking of breakfast, that will continue to be what it has been for the past, 3 or 4 years now. Overnight oats. So that's the plan. But you know what they say about even the best laid plans. Last but not least, exercise. I've done quite a lot of gym-related exercise, so lifting weights, for a good number of years now. And I find that if I go a few weeks or maybe a month without going to the gym, then I soon start to stiffen up and feel a bit miserable. So during my PGCE, I'm really hoping to still be able to make it to the gym at least twice a week. I mean, I may have to revise that, but I think twice a week might be doable. And to facilitate this, I've streamlined my gym program so that in just 2 sessions with 3 exercises per session, I'll be able to hit all of the main movements and thereby keep myself feeling loose and hopefully happy. Now, I'm going to add in a bonus one here. So something else that I find is very important when it comes to mental health, along with good sleep, good food, and good exercise, is socialisation. I think we may have all learnt this the hard way during the lockdowns of the past year or so. Currently, most of my socialisation is with my partner, who lives with me, but she's moving away to go to university. And I'll be in touch with her often, but it's not the same as having her in the room. And I'll no doubt meet lots of people via my school placement, but my relationship with them will be a professional one, which isn't the best for ticking that socialisation box. So in just the past few days, I've looked at the different clubs and societies that my university has to offer. So since I'm doing the PGCE, I'm a university student and can therefore get involved with these things. And I've narrowed it down to 3. Aikido, Judo, which are both martial arts. If I go with one of those, it may have to take the place of one of my gym sessions, we'll see. And the third, the Writing Society. So I still have a keen interest in creative writing and have got various ideas that I'd still like to develop. And so meeting like-minded people there could be a great way to do that and tick the socialisation box in the process. And with that, I think I've covered pretty much all the preparation I've done for my PGCE. I hope to publish one more episode before I start my PGCE. I'm going to talk to someone who knows a thing or two about PGCE students. And I'm going to ask him 2 very simple questions. What makes a good PGCE student and what makes a bad PGCE student? So keep an eye out for that. If you liked this episode, please spread the word in person and on social media. You can follow the podcast on Twitter @mypgcepod or email mypgcepod@gmail.com. Please subscribe, rate and review in your directory of choice. Please also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/mypgcepod and helping fund both the podcast and my PGCE course. Thank you and talk again soon.